In 1990, Christopher astonishes his teachers at school by finishing a test in just a few hours, a task that supposedly took Einstein 3 full days to complete. His older sister, Michelle, suggests he could enroll in college ahead of schedule, but he's uncertain if that's what he truly desires. As they leave, a soldier spots a cartoon robot printed on Christopher's t-shirt and reprimands him, warning him about the looming war. The robot depicted on the shirt is Cosmo, the main character of a widely loved animated series. However, due to rising anti-robot sentiment across the country, the show is abruptly canceled. Robots were initially created by Walt Disney for use in their theme parks in 1955, and later, they were mass-produced, becoming the primary workforce worldwide. For years, they functioned flawlessly, but eventually, they grew weary of their labor and revolted. The robots began demanding their own rights, organizing global protests led by Mr. Peanut. Discussions lead nowhere, and soon, a conflict between humans and robots erupts. Anyone found harboring a robot at home is branded a traitor. The war isn't going well for humanity, and Sergeant John appears on television to explain why. Robots don't need food, rest, or even to blink. For 2 years, humanity continues to fight, only to suffer repeated defeats. One day, Ethan, the founder of Center Technologies, invents the Neurocaster, a device that connects the human brain to drone-like bodies. With this invention, humans can now battle the robot army on equal footing, and within just 2 weeks, the war comes to an end. Humanity emerges victorious, and Colonel Bradbury is hailed as the ultimate hero. Peanut meets with Clinton and Ethan to sign the Treaty of Surrender, while over 6,000 robots are detained in the exclusion zone, located in the desert. Later, Ethan introduces a compact version of the Neurocaster for home use. This new model enables users to multitask, allowing them to work and enjoy leisure activities simultaneously. In 1994, Michelle is at home attempting to remove a monitoring device attached to her ankle when Ted suddenly barges in, wearing a Neurocaster. He scolds her for her actions and warns her that even though she fled from all her previous foster homes, she won't get away with it here. Michelle retorts by gesturing toward the pile of items he's stockpiling, reminding him that taking things from the exclusion zone is against the law. Afterward, she heads to class, where the teacher is also present, clad in her Neurocaster suit. All students are ordered to wear their helmets, and when Michelle refuses, she's sent to the principal's office. The principal notices on Michelle's file that she lost her entire family and assumes it was due to the war. Michelle clarifies that it was actually a car accident. The principal then explains that neurotherapy can help her temporarily forget her troubles, prompting Michelle to recall a memory of playing on the beach with her brother. That day, he had experienced a panic attack, and she had comforted him. Despite this, Michelle still declines to wear the helmet and returns home. That night, Michelle dreams of the car crash that claimed her family's lives. She remembers waking up in the hospital with a doctor watching over her, though she couldn't recall their face. In the present, Michelle is jolted awake by a sound coming from outside. She peers out the window and spots a shadow moving in her yard. Grabbing a flashlight, she ventures outside. Suddenly, she notices an eye reflected on a bottle just before a table topples over, sending her scrambling back indoors. She tries to alert Ted about the intruder, but he's completely immersed in the Neurocaster world. When the intruder forces their way in, Michelle dashes to hide under her bed. However, the intruder turns out to be a robot, which effortlessly lifts the bed to reveal Cosmo's face staring back at her. Michelle retreats to a corner of the room and attempts to communicate with Cosmo, who uses gestures to signal that he's searching for her. The robot is unable to speak, so he opens his head to allow Michelle to repair his voice circuit. Unfortunately, all he can produce are a few pre-recorded phrases. Then, Cosmo grabs a photo of the siblings and repeatedly points between himself and Christopher, hinting that they are one and the same. Michelle refuses to believe him and yanks the photo away forcefully, causing him to collide with the shelves. The commotion wakes Ted, who storms into the room upon seeing Cosmo. He accuses Michelle of causing trouble and starts shouting at her, sparking an argument that escalates when Ted shoves her against the robot. Cosmo mimics a gesture Christopher used to make, convincing Michelle of his claim before shoving Ted against the wall. Enraged, Ted grabs a golf club and attempts to strike Cosmo, but the robot swiftly snaps the club and pushes Ted again. This time, Ted ends up bleeding and rushes to call 911. Before he can do anything further, Michelle uses a taser to knock him unconscious. Afterward, Michelle and Cosmo hop into Ted's car, where the robot effortlessly removes the monitoring device from her ankle. Michelle has no idea how to drive, but improvises when Ted pursues them using his Neurocaster. The car manages to shake him off, allowing the pair to escape. The next morning, the car comes to a halt in the middle of the road due to a flat tire. Michelle rummages through the trunk for a spare, only to find it's broken as well. Frustrated, she peppers Cosmo with questions. He explains that Christopher is alive somewhere and controlling him remotely. When Michelle asks how to locate her brother, Cosmo points to Cento's company logo on a nearby sign. Using a Dr. Pepper can and additional gestures, Cosmo alludes to a doctor wearing glasses. This makes Michelle recall waking up in the hospital after the accident. She now remembers Dr. Amherst's face and how he informed her that Christopher had passed away in the hospital. Michelle pulls out a map, and Cosmo indicates a location deep within the exclusion zone. They realize they'll need a plan to infiltrate such a perilous area. Michelle recalls all the illegal items Ted had acquired. In the trunk, they discover a box containing the address of a sender's P.O. box in New Mexico, so they decide to track down that person, hoping they might have insight into entering the zone. The pair sneaks onto a train for part of their journey and continues the rest on foot. In the evening, Michelle stops at a store to grab some food. As she steps outside, she spots a truck approaching, so she pulls Cosmo into an alley to conceal themselves. The driver turns out to be John, who opens the P.O. box the duo had been searching for and retrieves a stack of cash. Moments later, a man in a Neurocaster suit shows up to buy a gun from John. Suddenly, the buyer turns the weapon on John and threatens to shoot him, only to be struck by an electric blast that disables his Neurocaster. This was the work of Herman, John's robotic partner, who helps drag the fallen machine away while discussing how to salvage its components. While they're occupied, Michelle and Cosmo slip into the back of the truck unnoticed. Meanwhile, Bradbury stumbles upon Ted's abandoned vehicle. The following day, the truck arrives at an old mine close to the exclusion zone. John and Herman begin moving their recent acquisitions inside, unaware that Michelle and Cosmo are hiding in a box. While John and Herman argue about missing cables, Michelle attempts to use the distraction to sneak around. However, Cosmo accidentally triggers a singing fish decoration, revealing their location. When John and Herman surround them, Michelle explains that she only needs a guide to navigate the exclusion zone, but John dismisses her as delusional. At that moment, the elevator ascends, and John concludes they've been followed, prompting the entire group to take cover. When the elevator descends again, it reveals Bradbury. He declares that the area is now under the control of the Robot Deactivation Task Force and orders John and Michelle to step forward with their hands raised. John tries to pass Michelle off as his sister, but Bradbury recognizes her and announces that she's under arrest. Herman attempts to zap Bradbury with an electric beam, but Bradbury anticipates the move and uses John as a human shield. Bradbury then opens fire, causing significant damage to the room as everyone scatters to hide. When he corners the robots, Michelle emerges and strikes his arm with a fire extinguisher. Bradbury snatches it from her and destroys it. As smoke fills the room, Michelle claps her hands to turn off the lights. Suddenly, the fish decorations start singing again, distracting Bradbury. Seizing the opportunity, John fires at him from behind. However, the bullets have no effect on the Neurocaster's body, and Bradbury quickly disarms John before grabbing him by the throat. Desperate to save him, Michelle and Cosmo surrender. After tossing John aside, Bradbury advances toward the pair, explaining that Cosmo is marked for termination. Just then, Herman causes a massive crane claw to drop and trap Bradbury. The entire group leaps into a mining cart to escape. However, John fumbles while trying to find the right key, giving Bradbury enough time to break free. He shoots at the cart, causing it to crash, and tries to target Cosmo as well. Herman intervenes once more, disarming Bradbury, and both robots engage him in combat. Michelle locates a bulldozer and uses it to pin Bradbury against the wall, triggering a rock slide that buries him as well. The mine begins collapsing, so the group scrambles to escape and save themselves. Watching his base crumble causes John to let out a frustrated scream, and he vents his anger at Michelle, blaming her for ruining everything. His rant is cut short by strange noises nearby, prompting the group to flee into a cave. From there, they observe scavenger robots scavenging for parts to repair themselves. When John spots an opportunity, he emerges and dismantles one of the robots to gain access to his garage, where he stores a van and an enormous suit that Herman uses to increase his size. After a heated argument, Michelle manages to persuade John to assist her. A short while later, Michelle, John, and Cosmo are inside the van, which Herman carries using the oversized suit. They venture into the exclusion zone, where Michelle notices countless broken robots scattered across the ground. During the journey, John recounts how he first encountered Herman. During the war, John's unit suffered a crushing defeat and was surrounded by adversaries. The soldiers were slated for execution by the robots, but Herman intervened after seeing John in tears and saved his life. A few days later, Senta drones tracked them down. Despite John's attempts to explain that Herman was harmless, the drones refused to listen, forcing the pair to flee to avoid being eliminated. Meanwhile, Ethan uses his neurocaster to revisit a memory involving his late mother, but the device malfunctions, forcing him to shut it off. Furious, he berates his team of scientists, demanding answers about the system failures. The scientists reveal that Christopher has escaped. If they fail to recapture him by Friday, the entire company will collapse. In a desperate move, Ethan meets Bradbury in the virtual realm. Aware that Cosmo is on Bradbury's target list, Ethan proposes a deal. Instead of handing Cosmo over to the authorities, he wants Bradbury to deliver him to the company. Back in the mine, Bradbury's neurocaster powers back on. Meanwhile, in the desert, the group debates whether to enter a derelict mall in search of supplies. A robot spots them and hurls a refrigerator, shattering the van's windshield. Herman tries to flee, but the attackers continue pelting objects, causing him to stumble and fall. The van flips upside down, and the group is quickly surrounded by robots, who seize them and escort them to the mall. Inside, they discover an entire robotic community, ranging from entertainment models to household appliances. Outside, a massive robot peers at them through a window. Mr. Peanut appears and apologizes for their capture, explaining that the robots assumed they were hostile scavengers. When Michelle shares her predicament with him, Peanut discloses that Dr. Amherst once visited this location and holds a doctorate in human-machine interaction. Peanut had promptly expelled him, so he has no idea where the doctor is now. Michelle is eager to leave and continue her search, but John reminds her of the dangers lurking at night, convincing her to postpone her plans until dawn. In private, Michelle reflects on her final Christmas with Christopher and how infrequently she saw him after he started college. Overwhelmed by emotion, she begins to cry, and Cosmo consoles her before playing the animated show the siblings used to enjoy together. Soon, other robots gather to watch, catching Peanut's attention. Later, after everyone has fallen asleep, they are abruptly woken by a male robot inquiring about Christopher. Cosmo raises his hand, and the robot hands him a postcard left by Amherst. The card contains an address and a note stating that Amherst will be waiting for him there. However, the location lies within scavenger territory, making it too risky to enter without a plan. Peanut overhears the discussion and introduces them to a training robot that keeps glitching while attempting to explain how to combat scavengers. John considers the robot unreliable, but he is impressed when it fires baseballs at incredible speed. By morning, Bradbury reaches the exclusion zone and observes the mall from a distance, noticing the group departing in Peanut's vehicle. They spend the entire day driving and arrive at an abandoned amusement park by nightfall, where the address is believed to be located. Michelle spots lights coming from one of the attractions and concludes that someone must be nearby. Suddenly, a massive clown head activates and eerie robots begin emerging around the group. The team starts running, firing at any hostile machines that get too close. Peanut attempts to communicate with the menacing robots, but they only respond with growls. The group reaches the building emitting the lights, only to discover that the doors are fake. As the robots close in, panic sets in. Suddenly, additional lights illuminate the park, music blares from the speakers, and flames erupt from several statues. The robots retreat in fear as a trapdoor beneath the group opens, sending them sliding into a concealed tunnel. In an underground chamber, they finally locate Amherst, who is thrilled to see the postcard in Cosmo's possession. Michelle immediately shoves him and demands answers about Christopher. Amherst reveals that the boy is being held in Senta's laboratories in Seattle. Following the accident, Christopher underwent routine testing, during which the MRI machine flagged him as extraordinary. He was precisely what they needed to win the war, so the doctor allowed Senta to take him and lied to Michelle about his demise. Amherst then activates a computer that plays footage of an experiment. Christopher had been in a coma, and they believed it was irreversible, so they linked his brain to the neurocaster network to keep him alive. Though Amherst regrets the decision, he insists it was necessary to save humanity and argues that Christopher would have otherwise perished in his bed. 13 months after the experiment began, Christopher regained consciousness, and Amherst intended to disconnect him. However, Ethan intervened, refusing to allow it and threatening to kill Amherst if he made any attempt. The doctor chose to flee but, before leaving, created a faint link between Christopher and the external network. He also provided Christopher with the location of the mall so he could seek refuge and form connections among the robots. Michelle emphasizes that Christopher already had a family, prompting John to punch Amherst on her behalf. At that moment, Bradbury arrives outside and fires at the entrance to access the tunnel. He slides down as well, but finds the room deserted. Suddenly, the lights go out and Peanut ambushes Bradbury from behind, slamming him into an electrical panel. Bradbury's neurocaster is briefly electrocuted, causing him to drop his weapon, but he regains his footing by shoving Peanut away. A fierce struggle ensues as Peanut reveals a hidden blade concealed within his cane, though Bradbury's superior strength allows him to overpower the smaller robot effortlessly. Meanwhile, the rest of the group attempts to sneak out but freezes upon hearing a noise. A squadron of soldier neurocasters descends from above and surrounds the group, demanding their surrender. The training robot begins launching balls with such force that it manages to shatter several helmets. Ethan observes the scene through surveillance cameras and orders the soldiers to capture Cosmo, authorizing lethal force against anyone who stands in the way. Cosmo tosses a ball to distract one of the soldiers, and Michelle sneaks up behind him, spraying paint until his propeller falters, causing him to crash into the ceiling. When another soldier tries to apprehend her, Amherst shoots him down and informs the pair of an escape route. John and the remaining robots continue battling the rest of the squad, using makeshift weapons to take them down. In the underground chamber, Bradbury tears off Peanut's hat and accuses him of violating the treaty, declaring that the consequences for his family are now his responsibility. Simultaneously, a group of soldiers storms the mall. Bradbury emerges and begins firing randomly at the attractions. Amherst urges his companions to flee before stepping forward to confront Bradbury, daring him to shoot. Bradbury hesitates to harm another human, so Ethan seizes control of a neurocaster and fires at Amherst himself. The doctor collapses onto debris and perishes as a metal rod pierces him, leaving Bradbury to question his own principles. Michelle and Cosmo attempt to escape, but find themselves surrounded by soldiers. One of the soldiers pins Michelle down while another grabs Cosmo and flies off with him. Bradbury shoots the neurocaster restraining Michelle and instructs her to return home before taking off himself. By morning, the group heads back to the mall, only to find it in shambles, with most of the robots obliterated. Meanwhile, Cosmo is brought to the Center Labs to be reunited with Christopher's physical body. As Ethan connects Cosmo to the system, Bradbury realizes he was deceived. Cosmo isn't merely a robot. Furious, he questions why he was sent to hunt down a child. Ethan reminds him that this boy played a crucial role in winning the war and argues that sacrifices are necessary for the advancement of their species. Back at the mall, John reassures Michelle not to lose hope, promising to assist her if she chooses to continue fighting. Michelle then examines Amherst's computer to verify that it contains the codes needed to exit the exclusion zone, as well as the location of the Seattle lab. The computer also reveals that disconnecting Christopher would cause the entire neurocaster network and the company itself to collapse. At that moment, Peanut returns and reminds Michelle of the treaty he signed to establish peace. However, Michelle convinces him that the attack on the mall renders the agreement void. Using a fleet of abandoned trucks, John, Michelle, and the surviving robots leave the desert and head towards Seattle. Herman locates a new oversized suit and uses it to hurl objects at the Center Labs, shattering their windows. Ethan immediately dispatches all his soldiers, prompting Herman and John to flee in order to draw them away. This creates an opportunity for Michelle and Amherst's computer to sneak into the facility. John fires at the approaching soldiers while Herman crushes them with his massive hands. However, one of the neurocasters self-destructs, bringing Herman's suit crashing down. When a soldier tackles John, Herman reveals a hidden secondary suit inside the first and rescues his friend, so they can keep moving. Once the task force is lured far enough away, the remaining robots join the battle. Bradbury witnesses the chaos unfold through the surveillance cameras. An enraged Ethan rushes to his office, dons a secret helmet that allows him to control a specialized neurocaster, and enters the fray, effortlessly dismantling most of the robots. In the main laboratory, Amherst's computer pretends to be a deranged, aggressive robot to scare off the scientists. Michelle confirms that her brother is still alive, but to communicate with him, she'll need to use a neurocaster. Simultaneously, Bradbury steps outside and informs Peanut of Ethan's whereabouts, remarking that he has finally encountered someone even less humane than a machine. He then powers off his neurocaster, officially abandoning the war. When Michelle dons the helmet, she finds herself reliving the memory of her final Christmas with her brother. She tells Christopher that she wants to save him, but he explains that his body is too frail and disconnecting him would mean certain death. Though he doesn't want to remain in this condition for the rest of his life, he insists that his sister proceed anyway. Meanwhile, Ethan destroys Herman's last suit. The small robot is also damaged, and John rushes to assist him, but it's already too late. At that moment, Peanut locates Ethan and declares his intention to renegotiate the treaty. In the laboratory, Michelle refuses to sever the connection with her brother, as she can't bear to lose him once more. Christopher argues that he hasn't experienced any sensations in years, making his recovery impossible, but he acknowledges that his friends still need his support. After shedding many tears, Michelle bids farewell to Christopher and returns to reality to disconnect him. The moment she does, all the neurocasters shut down, and the robots erupt in celebration of their triumph. John remains grief-stricken over Herman, whose head suddenly opens to reveal a miniature robot inside. Pandemonium ensues worldwide as every computer system ceases to function. News outlets begin reporting on Senta's experiments involving a human child, leading to Ethan's arrest, while the public starts demanding the dismantling of the exclusion zone. In the desert, John and the robots assist Michelle in creating a video where she urges people to discard their helmets and embrace life without them. Meanwhile, Cosmo is discarded in the trash, but his head unexpectedly begins to move.